Alrighty. Hello, everyone. Welcome to wasmCloud Wednesday for July 26th. We've got a pretty quick and short and sweet agenda for today. Taylor is actually not in the office today, so we're going to push the demo of the WIT provider to next week. But I'd love to just start off by doing a status update on where we are in terms of moving to WIT. I know it's kind of starting around the provider discussion, but we've also got things around actors as well. So we'll just go ahead and get started with that. And then later we can talk a little more about WATM. So just to kind of give the background for where Taylor was at and like what he would have demoed being here. We have a new PR into the wasmCloud repo around a provider SDK for wasmCloud providers for generating them from WIT IDL interfaces. So this is a really interesting PR if you wanted to see the kind of back end of all of the kind of the code gen and how it works behind the wasmCloud SDK. But essentially, this is a part adapted from WasmBus RPC and part new to work with interfaces using WIT instead of Smithy. And also included in this PR is the essentially wasmCloud core WIT that defines things like our link definition settings, host environment value, basically just interacting with wasmCloud providers. And if you'd like to see an example of the output of this essentially CodeGen or provider SDK, you can take a look at Taylor's repository for the NATS messaging WIT. So if you look at the this actual repository is using the new SDK for providers. You can look in the WIT folder to take a look at the actual messaging contract. So this is an actor would define a messaging handler that receives a message and can return, an error or just, nothing, saying it's okay. And then actors can make requests on capability providers with the request multi, and publish operations. So from this messaging interface, the WIT interface, there's also a world, but I'll kind of skip over some of the lower WebAssembly stuff. The really important thing is that the new actual code that's generated, actually might be in messaging, is nice and simple. So, I know there's a couple of lifetime indicators and things here, but we essentially, you can instantiate a new handler, and then the way that it works in order to, like, for each of the operations that you can invoke on a provider, there is a trait and an actual method that can be implemented by a specific capability provider. So I think as far as this goes, I'd actually like to leave it to Taylor to talk a little bit more around the specifics on implementation, just because I wasn't present for a lot of it. But I will say something which is really exciting, where this actual provider, this provider SDK is working and being generated from a WIT interface. This is for Rust. So essentially, as we move forward with this effort, we're going to be trying to change the wasmCloud first-party capability providers to use WIT, and then, examples and everything from there. I guess I'll share one more thing that I forgot to bring up, is that Roman actually created a issue milestone in the wasmCloud repository. It's kind of the first of its kind. This one is just talking, the epic is called Witify, and there's just a couple of small tasks that he's outlined in order to get to this milestone of using all WIT contracts for our various actors and capability providers. So we're tracking some of the work here. There's a larger effort around creating a wasmCloud roadmap that I hope to share an update with soon. But for now, I'd actually like to ask Jordan, I know you've been really involved in this effort. Did I say anything super wrong, or would you like to add anything else here to how this is going?
No, I talked with Taylor for about an hour and a half yesterday, and yeah, you pretty much nailed it. So him and I are actually working in parallel. So I think Brooks shows the Taylor's Rust one. We actually have the entire provider SDK being rewritten in Go for WIT as well. And I think I shared about last week, we have it's not, Taylor did an example with like a WASI contract. I with a few edits, the WASI messaging. I did a custom contract to test something else, which is just a ping pong. You just, the actor pings, the provider pings, the actor pongs. But the good news is we do have both languages working. And then the only other difference is where Taylor's using a lot of the Bytecode Alliance crates that are provided. I'm also have work, and I shared it in Slack somewhere, porting the WIT file parser to Go, which is done, done to a POC level. And then from that, also Go native code gen, not importing anything like Rust headers or C headers or whatever. So there's the two are going in parallel. And if you're wondering why this is necessary, yes, Justin, that is it. If you look in, well, I'll tell you about it. And if you ask why this is necessary, it's necessary as long as providers are standalone binaries. The day we get to componentize providers, we will only need one or the other. We will not need both. But that day is in the future somewhere. So until then, we need a language support. So yeah, if you hit command and then go into wasmCloud. So this repo is the lexer and the parser, and this little toy command is essentially the code generation. So it imports that that rpc.toml and parses it all to wasmCloud specific code gen. And then actually, I'll share one thing, Brooks, if I can.
Yeah, go for it.
Because Bailey approved my picture this morning. Try not to share my whole desktop. So essentially, this is kind of where we're at, right? So you have the wasmCloud host up here. It's going to export host call and import guest call. You have your actors and your providers here. So when I say wasmCloud, I essentially have this blue box created. And I think, speaking of Taylor, he's in the same spot. At the moment, we're compiling in the capabilities to do this, which is not what we want. Essentially, this will be its own WebAssembly component that you use, like, was it Wasm tool, componentize or whatever. And then the actor will then, so the actor being a WebAssembly file, the wasmCloud being a WebAssembly file, and then you'll push some magic button and they'll become one giant component. So right now we're both working on essentially the imports and exports of what is a wasmCloud. At the moment, we're both compiling everything into one big actor, which obviously is not a component, but it's the first step on the way to components. So I would expect one of us will have a good example in the weeks to come.
Yeah, so Jordan, with this picture, which I actually really like, it says one thing to me, and I want to make sure that I understand the motivation for this wasmCloud. So the way that I understand it is when you write a WebAssembly component, you can do all kinds of component linking, but all of that needs to be deterministic. So whether it's at, whether it's a build time or at instantiate or just before instantiation time, each individual interface or component that you depend on for an import or an export, you have to specify and then satisfy. And what I understand this to essentially enable, like with the way that wasmCloud is going to do a wasmCloud, is it preserves a similar way to how we have actors and providers communicate now, where even if it's a custom contract or one that we expect, we can basically have the flexibility of the WebAssembly component model, but still communicate over the wasmCloud lattice to a provider that's running somewhere else. Is that kind of the main motivation for this architecture?
Yeah, so I don't want to misspeak, because especially since Bailey's not here to correct me, but essentially what I'm being told is that wasmCloud host will have pretty much the whole wasmCloud contract built in, which we can drop a link, but is like 95% of functionality that all people will need. However, when it comes to custom contracts, we will require this WASI field because essentially the flow, let's just go this way. An actor, creates an invocation, wants to send to the provider, and then the payload inside the invocation can be at this point whatever serialization method we want. The envelope itself is message pack, and that is a wasmCloud decision, and that will stay that way. However, this WASI fill is necessary because with a custom contract, it does not know what to do with that inside payload. So when the host call comes, or let's even say when the actor sends something like ping, this WASI field will wasmCloud ties it and then send it to the host. If I were using one of the wasmCloud built-in contracts, I would not necessarily need this WASI field. The actor could go straight to host call and it could handle it.
Okay. And I mean, so thinking about it that way, or I guess I'll start with my first question and then move on. So this WASI fill component, we're essentially going to snap that on to the custom contract at build time, right? Like before we run it in wasmCloud.
Yeah, my understanding, because I don't, obviously you'll know better than me. My understanding is wash build will cover all of this for us because the wasm tools componentize is a crate. So eventually wash build will have all that built into it. So where right now you could to do it, the command line confuses me. We go to that what is that web app that like wasm builder or whatever, the component builder thingy.
Yeah.
So once I'm hoping soon we'll actually be able to put a WASI fill in, put an actor in, and then we can visualize the line. Well, essentially this exact picture. Because then once we have essentially these two made into a component, then we can load it into wasmCloud, and host call and guest call are the only things that these two communicate over.
Okay. Super cool. The other thing that I was going to say is that, I think that adding on this WASI fill may seem like more than it is. It really just seems like an extra step of like, you're going to be passing a small payload, and in order to actually make it work with wasmCloud, especially with our security requirements, we just have to have a small little wrapper layer around that like will do a serialization trip so that we can send it over the wire. Other things that are really important is like each invocation in wasmCloud is signed. So being able to have that logic in the WASI fill is really cool because we don't have to implement it for each source language. Those are the things. Oh, go ahead, Jordan.
No, I was just saying, I think, and just to emphasize, this will only be necessary for the custom contracts, right? Since wasmCloud is building in like most of the all of the wasmCloud contract, which is, I can drop that link if I can find it.
Right, which is really cool. Okay, great. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to, and I know that Victor is working on some of this, and I'm trying to get caught up with it as soon as I can wrap up some of my work that I'm doing on WADM. Would love to talk and get some diagrams out for how the wash build process, or if it's wash componentize, whatever we use, how that all is going to stitch things together. Because I think it's going to be a really important part for, taking a WebAssembly component. And then, of course, with wasmCloud, we require that all of the WebAssembly modules that you run on a wasmCloud host are signed by an issuer and an identity key. We require them to declare essentially with WebAssembly now, with imports and exports, you're kind of declaring what contracts you want to use. But I think doing it not just at the import and export level, because like a library could do that, and doing it at the claims is still a good idea. Really teasing out like the added benefit of adding that adding the wasmCloud security on top of a component will be a great, I think that'll be a great topic for discussion. Jordan, I saw you pinged a few. I don't know why I muted myself there. You pinged a few things. You want me to share any of those?
All right. So the first one is just like the issue that calls for the wasmCloud core. But the second one I forgot is Bailey's talk. So if you want to know what wasmCloud core is, definitely check that out.
Oh yeah, look at that. wasmCloud.
I think that I Google wasmCloud and that's the second link.
I can see that. Okay, cool. Well, Jordan, thank you so much for adding more info there. I keep learning more and more things about this, and I'm looking forward to getting involved more with the componentized effort. Does anybody else have any other questions for me? I can try, or Jordan. All right, sweet. Well, Justin, did you unmute there? Or I might have just seen a little flicker.
Nope.
Okay, a little flicker then. All right, well then we can move on to the next part of the call, which I think is just going to be a little short and sweet, but I just wanted to call attention to the fact that I started cutting alpha releases for WATM 0.5 yesterday. And there are a couple of main things that are going to be going into the 0.5 release. It's going to include some new features that, of course, are minor breaking changes. So we're going to bump a minor version. There's a lot of fixes and features around the multi-tenant flag, which if you're looking in the README for WATM down at the bottom under the advanced section, the multi-tenant mode essentially allows a WATM instance to monitor multiple lattices. And one other thing that I'll show for there is actually a wasmCloud in production guide on, where is it? There is something under the WATM. Here we go. Under the WATM guides under fundamentals, there's a deploying WATM guide. And this kind of talks through the process of generating NATs, operators, accounts, users. It's a little bit of a deeper dive than I expect anybody who is developing applications with wasmCloud to go through. This is really more on the platform engineer side where you're setting up your NATs cluster. And we're really trying to, I guess, help the documentation and how you may use this specifically with WATM here. There's a link to the NATs documentation. But I just want to call out that we are kind of fleshing out that one feature, the monitoring multiple lattices or multi-tenant feature. And then there are a couple of issues that I'd also love to see make it into the 0.5 milestone, which is why I started cutting alpha releases over release candidates, because there's new features that are going to come in. I'd specifically love to add in logic to validate manifests so that when you do a wash app put, or you kind of try to put a manifest for a new application, we do essentially for this version, it may end up being a bare minimum of validating a couple of fields are correct, or maybe comparing a manifest to a JSON schema. But what I really want to do is add in a couple of things that just kind of round out the WATM experience. You may have noticed if you deploy an application now, the status is always kind of static. It doesn't change. I'd also love to implement that so that you can see if your WATM application is fully deployed, if it's working on fully deploying, which is, I think we call it compensating, or if it's failed for any reason, like you're trying to run a wasmCloud actor in US East 1 and US East 2, and there's no host that's available in US East 2. We'd love to show that as a status message. And last but not least, what would be really awesome to support, which may or may not make it into this release just because of a couple of complications, which I'm actually happy to discuss, are version upgrades. So one thing that you can't do with WATM right now is set up an application. Say you're going to deploy an actor like Echo version 3. And then, later you upgrade your actor to version 4 and you say, hey, Wadham, please, here's a new version of the manifest. We're going to run Echo version 4. Wadham just compares public keys right now. So it sees that an Echo actor is running and will be satisfied. You kind of have to stop it manually. So what I really want to do is if you do upgrade a component, whether that's an actor or a provider, and you have a newer version, that Wadham can handle doing that upgrade. So with that being said, just a heads up that there's a couple of things that I'd like to push into this alpha release. I can send a command actually in the wasmCloud Slack if you're interested in trying any of them out, just how to get Wash to download the alpha version for you. But I should have a more fully featured demo next week. I can show off a couple other things depending on what we can get done. I think the last call out there, if you're interested in contributing to Wadham, which is just a Rust project, we've got a couple of these issues marked as good first issue. And feel free to reach out to me or Taylor on Slack if that's something that you find yourself interested in. All right. Any questions on the Wadham 0.5 roadmap? All right. I know I didn't put it on the agenda for today, but Liam, I know that there are a couple of conferences that are coming up that you wanted to highlight. At least you sent me a couple last week and we didn't get to it in time for the end of the call. Do you have those handy? Did you want to share some of the upcoming events that we've got going on?
I do, absolutely. Let me just pull up a couple posts here. All right. So hopefully everybody this week saw the release of the Bytecode Alliance updated roadmap for WebAssembly. That was a ton of work that Bailey Hayes led. And I contributed by producing video and a few other things. I want to, those documents couldn't come at a better time because we have two great events that are imminent. We've got Bacon, which is what I want to call it, the Bytecode Alliance WebAssembly Hackathon, nominally referred to as Componentize the World. And we also have the Linux Foundation wasmCon. Cosmonic will be there, and you should too. Let me tell you why. Over wasmCon, which I'm co-chair of, we've got an incredible schedule pulled together, highlighting some of the most exciting WebAssembly projects from a speaker's perspective, as well as many of the usual suspects in the WebAssembly ecosystem, like Cosmonic and wasmCloud. This is September 6th and 7th, so you'll see all the exciting things. And then Friday, September the 8th, Microsoft has generously agreed to host the Componentize the World Hackathon, where we're going to take all that knowledge that you've learned, break up into groups by language, such as Rust, Python, and JavaScript, and then start porting popular frameworks to components. So it should be a great time to get a lot of practical hands-on help to socialize, network, and as always, just continue to move the ball for all things WASM down the field. I also want to go ahead and just do a call out that WASM Day US, the CFP is still open for this. This is November 6th in Chicago, Illinois. The CFP is open until August the 6th. So please feel free to reach out with your proposals on anything that falls in the intersection of cloud native and WebAssembly. Any questions for me? Back to you with the weather.
Always me who gets stuck on weather duty. Thank you, Liam. I think that thank you for actually mentioning the Bytecode Alliance, the updated roadmap for developers. I put that link on our YouTube and it's here in the Zoom as well. I think in our Slack, it's all over the place. I really want to call attention to this. This is a really sweet article to go through, and the video I would say is a I mean, it's not mandatory, but Bailey has a way of expressing things with words and diagrams that beats text. So I would highly recommend watching the video here just to understand where things are going in the WebAssembly standards space. And, maybe next week, if we can get our guest star Bailey to come back on, we could actually have her go over some of this in the community call as well. Some of the things that she's got, kind of laid out on that diagram. I think that was what I had planned to talk about during the community call today. Does anyone have any other questions about what we've talked to today? Otherwise, we can move on to just a little bit of free time. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. Then I think we'll go ahead and open it up. We'll stay on live stream just to see if there's anything interesting that we wanted to chat about. But does anybody have anything that they'd like to talk about in the wasmCloud community, some of the efforts that we have going on, or just general Wasm community?
I can't help but feel like it would be helpful at this point for WebAssembly because there is so much churn and change going on under the hood, and there's lots of different terminology being generated around those new, projects, those new ways of executing things. That I think it's easy if you're not on the inside of that to kind of lose track of where things are, what's happening, or what maybe even new terms can mean. So the roadmap is great from like a functional perspective if you understand what those pieces are going to bring to the table. But I can't help but feel like there's an opportunity for another like summary style of the landscape. Sorry, Liam, I see you got your hand up there. I would imagine you're working on this already.
Yeah, when we pulled together the what's going on, we realized immediately that it doesn't effectively convey the so what. What does this mean? And those sort of impacts. So we're already working on the next blog post that is the sort of update to the ecosystem that drives point, I think, the sort of implications of what it means and what it means to developers, just the greater story here. We really had thought about even holding it. Nick Fitzgerald had given us the feedback that we should think about adding that into the blog post. But we honestly just needed to get the tactical roadmap out there and in a way so that everybody understood what was the state of all the work streams and how they were related to each other, what was going to be in WASI Preview 2, what was maybe being released at the same time but wasn't officially going to be in, and just get the tactical update out. That's a very insightful comment. And if you're open to it, maybe I could pull you in as a reviewer, Justin. And I'd love to get your feedback on the post as we pull it together.
I'd be happy to kind of give feedback on that. I feel like pretending, quote unquote, I have a friend who's quite good at acting like a 5-year-old who needs everything explained to him.
I was a good person to dial in those roadmaps. I did the bulk of the authorship on the post, but it was all based on Bailey's great presentation that's recorded in the video. In fact, the video came before the post to get it out there because that's where she'd done, I think, most of the hard work to negotiate what's in, what's out. But I think I played the role of a 5-year-old very well and a 5-year-old's understanding. So I think that if I can get it to a level where it means something to me, I think that that's super helpful. And I would certainly appreciate both your opinion and everyone else's opinion on this call for how we dial that in right for the so what.
I'd be honored.
Yeah, definitely look forward to the kind of the higher level why WASM. That'll be a great article.
Is there a blog post format that lets you start it like a explain like I'm 5 and then jump to 15 and then 25 and then 35. I just think that'd be cool.
I've been wanting a scroll bar that progressively increments the detail scope on articles for years.
This sounds like a great chat GPT ask, right? Like the advanced version, and then to have all the versions in between. Oh, please don't do that. Please don't, Jordan, please don't do that.
I really like the I feel like I have this like fantasy sci-fi thing in my head where you have a blog post that like by default all the text is just like the 5-minute or the 5-year-old level of understanding, and then you have this like slider where the further you slide it, the more text can kind of pop out, the more paragraphs and explainers. That'd be a pretty sweet little blog format.
Yeah, that's kind of what I've been wanting for a while. And then having it all in just an easy text with basically no external links. So everything that is a new term is defined within the blog post as well. It's all there. It's in one place. I mean, that is also friendly to people who might be sight impaired, right? Who kind of need to just deep dive on something. I feel like it'd be helpful. And then it can feel more like a authoritative mentor, right, to someone. It's kind of what I'm going for. What would it look like to mentor someone through a post on all things WASI?
All right. Well, I started building something in Tori for fun, and I ended up getting in over my head. And I was like, nah, somebody I'm sure has done this before, but it sounds like maybe not. So maybe I'll have to like dust that off again.
Yeah, I gotta say the best thing that I found for documentation in recent years is Docusaurus. That's what wasmCloud uses now. It's just a really nice framework for turning Markdown into docs and all of that. But there are some advanced features in it that I wonder if some of them could address this. Like I know there's versioning and internationalization. You could like hijack into one of those to change like the education level. This is like a whole other, this is definitely a rabbit hole where we are totally off of the talking about wasmCloud things, but that is it'd be a really interesting thing, John, if you keep working on that.
Yeah, I was surprised Justin didn't make you use Hugo, but yeah, sounds good.
We did use Hugo for a little bit. We did use Hugo for a little.
I don't force tools on anyone.
I do.
We tried to force Rust on Jordan, and you can see how that turned out. All right, everyone. Well, I think that probably marks the end of this community call. Short and sweet, just kind of updates on the roadmaps, which I think is totally fine. I really appreciate you all coming and hanging out for a little bit today. But we'll see you next week and see if we can get that witified provider demo going.